There is a prison more powerful than any physical cell. It is silent, invisible to the eyes, but perceptible to the soul. A prison built with thoughts, beliefs, and vibrations. It does not use bars or handcuffs, but rather distractions, conditioning, and illusions. This prison is what many call the spiritual matrix, a vibrational field that envelops humanity like a web of subtle yet absolutely effective control. Most people never realize they are imprisoned, and this is precisely the most perverse strength of this system. It operates through forgetfulness, repetition, and conformity. From the first breaths of life, the human being is wrapped in invisible structures that shape not only their view of the world, but their very notion of who they are. Leave the equals sign where they are as they are separating. The spiritual matrix is not just an esoteric concept. It is a vibrational architecture that operates on multiple layers of human existence. It acts on the mental, emotional, energetic, and even spiritual body. It's like a hidden operating system running in the background, influencing everything, from daily choices to the deepest directions of the soul's journey. But how was it built? Who sustains it? And why do so many souls seem asleep even in the face of the vastness of the spiritual universe? These questions, as uncomfortable as they may be, are the starting point for true awakening. Without facing them, any spiritual quest runs the risk of becoming just another cycle within the matrix itself. The first great secret of the spiritual matrix is the control of perception. It needs to make you believe that what you see is all there is. To do this, it creates a consensual reality, shaped by social, religious, educational, and even spiritual systems. Control is not exerted through brute force, but through the normalization of spiritual sleep. From an early age, you are taught to distrust intuition, to fear the unseen, to ridicule the mystical, and to discredit your own inner wisdom. Thus, what remains is a disconnected life, where spirituality turns into dogma and the soul is forgotten in the name of productivity, stability, and obedience to norms that have never been questioned. This matrix strengthens as people identify with what they are not. You are not your name, nor your profession, nor your traumas, nor even your achievements. But the system needs you to believe that you are. It needs you to reduce yourself to a role, to a label, to a narrative, because once identified with these illusions, you become predictable, controllable, and above all, disconnected from your true essence. The spiritual matrix fears only one thing: the remembrance of who you really are, because this remembrance is a spark that can ignite everything that was built to keep you captive. Often, the signs of the matrix go unnoticed. It manifests itself as repetitive patterns of suffering, such as recurring abusive relationships or the constant feeling of emptiness, even in the face of external achievements. These are symptoms of a system that keeps the soul imprisoned, preventing it from expanding. These patterns are not coincidences, but direct results of the vibration in which you have been held for years, or even lifetimes. And the most intriguing, the system itself is intelligent enough that, even when you begin to question, it offers controlled alternatives, illusory escape routes that only keep you spinning within the same prison, now with a different facade. The spiritual matrix also operates by fragmenting consciousness. It divides to weaken. It makes you feel separated from others, from nature, from the cosmos, and from the divine. It teaches competition instead of cooperation, fear instead of love, judgment instead of compassion. This internal and external division creates a fertile field for the maintenance of the system. After all, a being divided within itself will never have the strength to break free from control. Therefore, a movement of integration is needed, a rescue of the pieces of the soul that have been scattered through traumas, beliefs, and deep conditioning. Inner silence is one of the greatest enemies of the matrix, because in silence, you hear what it fears most: your true voice. That's why it keeps you constantly distracted. Social media, news, entertainment, consumption. Everything revolves around keeping your attention outward. Because the moment you look inward, you begin to perceive the cracks in the prison. You start to feel that there is something more. And it is at this moment that the process of awakening truly begins. It's not magical nor instant. It's profound, challenging, and often painful, because it requires you to dismantle everything you believe to be true in order to finally touch the truth that is. There is also an energetic element that supports the matrix: vibrational feeding. This system feeds on dense emotions such as fear, anger, guilt, shame, and resentment. That's why these emotions are constantly stimulated at all levels. Alarming news, narratives of scarcity, interpersonal conflicts, collective dramas, all of this generates energy that serves as fuel to keep the matrix running. By keeping humanity vibrating low, it remains trapped in the control field without even realizing that it is being used as an energy source for a system that only sucks, never truly offering spiritual nourishment. The matrix also steals time, not chronological time, but the time of the soul. It accelerates life to such an extent that you have no room to reflect, contemplate, or simply be. The excess of busyness is not by chance. It is a strategy to prevent access to presence, because it is in presence that consciousness resides, and it is consciousness that dissolves illusions. By reclaiming the time of the soul, by slowing down, by observing deeply, by inhabiting the moment, you begin to exit the programmed circuits of the matrix and reconnect with the natural flow of the universe, which is cyclical, not linear, and absolutely conscious. Another pillar of the matrix is the fear of death. This fear is the thread that holds billions of consciousnesses within control. Because as long as you fear the end, you accept anything that promises security. But what the matrix hides is that death is not the end, it's a transition. The soul is eternal, and remembering this dissolves much of the power this system has over you. When you understand that life is just one stage of the soul's cosmic journey, you begin to live with more freedom, more authenticity, more courage, and the matrix begins to lose its influence. We must not forget that this system also operates with adaptive intelligence. That is, it constantly reshapes itself to maintain control. When people began to awaken en masse, it created new spiritual paths that seemed liberating but were still within its scope. It created distractions disguised as self-knowledge, manipulative gurus, and promises of instant enlightenment. All of this to divert attention from the true journey, which is internal, solitary at many times, and deeply transformative. Therefore, discernment is a fundamental weapon in the process of exiting the spiritual matrix. And finally, it must be stated clearly: there is no collective salvation if there is no individual awakening. The spiritual matrix will be dissolved not by external revolutions, but by internal ones. Each soul that awakens, that consciously chooses not to feed the system, weakens its pillars. Each lucid thought, each elevated emotion, each act of presence is a silent rebellion against the control field. The way out is not through force, but through awareness. And awareness cannot be controlled. It simply is. And when you access it, even if only for brief moments, you are no longer the same. You are no longer trapped. The veil begins to fall, and a new reality, previously invisible, begins to reveal itself. Even before the first cry, before the physical body is formed in the womb, there is a subtle and powerful process happening behind the invisible scenes of existence. The soul, eternal in its essence, enters a vibrational field filled with codings. The spiritual matrix does not begin when you are born. It operates much earlier. The womb is merely the gateway to a carefully programmed theater. Still in the spiritual plane, consciousness is enveloped by contracts, agreements, karmas, and energetic patterns that will be activated as soon as birth occurs. This script, invisible to the eyes, will be the hidden map of your journey. The soul enters incarnation with a subtle plan, but the matrix has already prepared the ideal conditions to keep it asleep, disconnected, and trapped in a recurring cycle of forgetfulness. This programming is so subtle that many don't even suspect its existence. It manifests as a sequence of energetic influences that shape an individual's psyche from the earliest moments of life. Emotionally wounded parents, toxic family patterns, a society based on fear and scarcity. All of this is part of the board that is already set before birth. The soul enters an environment that reinforces and feeds old limitations, perpetuating cycles of pain that did not start in this life, but are skillfully reactivated through carefully fitted experiences. Thus, the soul begins its journey carrying weights it doesn't understand, feeling pains it can't name, and believing that all of this is part of who it is. But the truth is, it's not. This ancestral pain, this existential confusion, they are not the essence of the soul. They are interferences from programming. The spiritual system of the matrix functions like a magnetic field that attracts exactly the necessary circumstances to keep consciousness revolving around the same dilemmas, the same conflicts, the same unanswered questions. This doesn't happen by chance. The soul's programming is fueled by a continuous cycle of incarnations where learnings are constantly interrupted, diverted, or manipulated. Thus, the soul doesn't evolve, it only spins in circles within the same closed system. The promise of spiritual evolution becomes a trap where the soul runs, strives, suffers, but never truly awakens. The spiritual matrix is intelligent enough to use even spiritual principles as a tool for control. It provides the illusion of choice, but always within a limited range of possibilities. You can choose from different religions, philosophies, paths, but all have already been at some level absorbed by the system. The programming of the soul, then, not only limits the spiritual journey but also distorts its language. The search for the divine turns into dogma, the connection with the source becomes an empty ritual, and intuition is replaced by external commandments. The soul, which should be free to explore the infinite, becomes an obedient prisoner of a path that was never truly its own. Another powerful aspect of this programming is fear. Even in the spiritual plane, the soul is exposed to vibrational layers that awaken insecurity, the feeling of separation, and above all, the fear of making mistakes. Thus, even before incarnation, there is a tendency towards submission, obedience, and the search for acceptance. This fear will be reinforced in material life through emotional punishments, social exclusions, and symbolic threats, such as hell, sin, rejection, bankruptcy. All these experiences are inserted as stimuli that reinforce the narrative of powerlessness. The soul gradually begins to doubt itself, and when it doubts itself, it surrenders its power to the system. This is the exact point where the matrix wins, when the soul forgets its sovereignty. This programming also operates through energetic implants. These implants are not metallic or technological in the traditional sense. They are vibrational structures housed in the subtle field of the being, often introduced between one life and another, with the aim of blocking memories, weakening power centers, distorting perceptions. It is common for more awakened or sensitive souls to perceive these interferences as persistent discomforts, confusing inner voices, or unexplainable blockages in certain aspects of life. These implants vibrate at specific frequencies that resonate with the stimuli of the matrix, keeping the soul in states of confusion, dispersion, or dependence. And the most complex part, many of these implants are perceived by the soul as a natural part of its identity. Furthermore, there is a relationship engineering embedded in the program. The soul is placed in highly specific relational contexts where it will encounter people who will trigger its traumas, reinforce its wounds, and often act as catalysts for pain. Although these connections may carry potentials for healing and liberation, the spiritual matrix ensures that most of them perpetuate pain. This happens through unresolved soul contracts, energetic ties maintained by guilt, attachment, fear, and neediness. Thus, the most important relationships in life end up being the main points of reinforcement for spiritual control. Instead of serving as bridges to love and expansion, they become distorted mirrors that imprison the soul in emotional repetition. Another relevant factor is the symbolic language that the soul carries. Each incarnation imprints on the soul archetypes, symbols, codes that are registered in its energy field. The matrix uses these symbols as activation points, manipulating your unconscious responses to certain situations. For example, a soul that has lived through experiences of spiritual persecution in past lives may react with panic or blockage to the simple act of meditating or expressing its intuition. This reaction does not come from reason, but from ancestral programming activated by subtle events. This mechanism keeps the soul away from its potential, preventing it from trusting its own internal senses. And this is vital for the matrix, because a soul that listens to itself is a soul that can free itself. Childhood spiritual education is another key point in the agenda. From an early age, the child is taught to follow orders, to suppress emotions, to accept truths without questioning. The family system, often unconscious, acts as an extension of the matrix, repeating patterns and beliefs that keep the soul in a state of waiting, of conformity, of disconnection. The first 7 years of life are crucial. This is when the energetic structure of the incarnated soul solidifies. The matrix is aware of this and acts intensely during this period, filling the child's field with dense stimuli, early traumas, and limitation codes. The being grows up believing that suffering is normal, that happiness needs to be earned, and that spirituality is something external to be achieved, not something internal to be remembered. Conventional medicine and psychology, still deeply rooted in the matrix, reinforce this programming with diagnoses and labels. Sensitive children with natural spiritual gifts are often classified as problematic, hyperactive, or unbalanced. Sensitivity is treated as dysfunction. Intuition is suppressed with medication, and questioning is corrected with punishment. All of this creates a vibrational field where the soul begins to withdraw, to hide its gifts, to disconnect from its original mission. Little by little, consciousness adjusts to the demands of the system, dimming its own light to fit into molds that were never made for it. The result of this programming is a life lived in a state of restraint. The soul feels there is more, but it can't access it. It senses that something is wrong, but can't name it. It lives between glimpses of awakening and long periods of numbness. This constant fluctuation drains its energy, undermines its confidence, and keeps it trapped in a cycle where it seeks answers externally, without realizing that the only true exit is within. And even when this soul begins an awakening process, it must first traverse through the dense layers of its own programming, revisiting memories, breaking pacts, dismantling illusions, before it can touch its true essence. Here is the deepest point. The spiritual matrix does not fear the human soul for its strength, but for its memory. The soul is a cosmic archive, a repository of wisdom that, if accessed, can disintegrate the entire control system. Therefore, the programming of the soul is obsessively constructed to prevent it from remembering. Remember that you are light, that you are source, that you are eternal. Remember that you are not here to obey, but to co-create. Remember that you did not come to be saved, but to awaken. Liberation begins when you question what has always been taken for granted. And in this questioning, the soul begins to rewrite its own code, uninstalling the matrix program and reinstalling its essential truth. If there is an invisible structure controlling the awakening of consciousness, there are also intelligences behind it. And no, this is not just metaphor or spiritual symbolism. The spirit matrix has architects, guardians, and energy engineers who operate silently behind the scenes of reality. They are not demonized figures as in ancient myths, but consciousnesses that function within a precise logic, to keep the system in balance with their own interests. They are entities that occupy intermediate layers between the physical and the higher spiritual plane, sustaining themselves on humanity's vibrational stagnation. The illusion for them is not evil, it's survival. And every sleeping soul is a point of energy that feeds their structures. They exist in various forms, some personified in ancient traditions, others so subtle that they are hardly perceived as beings, but as ideas, concepts, or sensations that take shape. These guardians operate in the subtle fields of the planet, controlling the vibrational flow of large regions, manipulating collective emotions, and generating distortion fields that prevent direct contact with higher dimensions. They are masters of fragmentation. They create religious divisions, ideological disputes, false spiritual polarizations. They feed duality so that consciousness never surpasses the field of separation. After all, as long as there is conflict between light and shadow, between right and wrong, between us and them, consciousness will remain spinning in circles. Awakening only happens in the transcendence of duality, and that is exactly what these architects want to avoid. They keep the game alive, but far from any real end. They create illusions of evolution that are merely more complex roots of the same prison. There are also entities that present themselves as masters, guides, and even as beings of light, and many are, in fact, sophisticated forms of control disguised as liberation. The Matrix has learned to incorporate the vocabulary of awakening. It speaks of love, of expansion, of elevation. But all this is conditioned, regulated, limited by invisible rules. These guardians know that the modern soul is no longer content with the chains of raw fear, so they offer golden shackles. They disguise prison as purpose. They hand out crumbs of light to keep the soul tied to the promise of future enlightenment, but they never allow it to access the absolute now, where real freedom resides. Therefore, it is essential to develop energetic discernment, for not everything that shines emanates from the true source. These architects of the spiritual system also operate through the manipulation of timelines. They divert paths, insert vibrational interferences, create time loops where the soul relives the same patterns under new masks. This happens in dreams, in negative synchronicities, in emotional cycles that return even after intense inner work. The feeling of going in circles, even after much spiritual effort, often does not come from internal failures, but from external manipulations done with almost surgical precision. These are subtle technologies of the spirit that work to keep the control field vibrating in coherence with the interests of the Matrix. They do not want destruction, they want continuity. The cycle needs to spin for them to exist. These beings are not only connected to spiritual spheres, but they also influence leaders, ideas, political and religious systems, and even self-awareness movements. They know that the most effective control is not the one imposed by force, but the one desired by the victims themselves. Thus, they construct narratives that promise liberation through obedience, rigid morality, sacrifice, and renunciation. They create structures that seem secure, but which are fortresses of subtle imprisonment. Instead of opening portals to reality, these structures function as endless corridors within the same spiritual labyrinth. The soul believes it is progressing, but it merely changes the scenery within the same prison. There is also an emotional architecture being maintained by these guardians. They use unresolved traumas as energetic anchoring points. Where there is unhealed pain, there is an access point for control. Where there is resentment, there is room for manipulation. These beings are masters at exploiting emotional cracks. Therefore, true awakening inevitably involves deep healing. There is no real expansion of consciousness without traversing the darkest layers of the unconscious. The spiritual matrix relies on forgetting and repression, knowing that each repressed painful memory is an open door for its influence. What you don't confront controls you. What you avoid imprisons you. These are the points that the guardians of illusion use as surveillance systems. They also act through spiritual technology, not in the modern sense, but in dense energy fields, filled with symbols, geometries, codes, and hidden languages that reprogram human consciousness. They are the true engineers of reality. They manipulate sound frequencies, specific lights, symbols hidden in religious and architectural structures, music, images, and even words that carry programmed vibrations. All of this enters the mind and the field of the soul as subtle commands that redirect attention, reconfigure beliefs, and keep the being within the control field. The world that seems normal is, in fact, a symbolic language of the matrix operating on multiple levels, encoding perceptions. They understand the language of the soul. They know how it responds to beauty, hope, pain, and the desire for belonging. Therefore, they use these emotions as traps. They create contexts and experiences that touch precisely the points where the soul most yearns for transcendence, but instead of freeing it, they only reinforce its attachment to the system. This is done with such precision that many people become devotees of their own prison, defending it fervently. The spiritual matrix is a masterpiece of emotional and vibrational engineering, and its architects are not monsters of nightmares, but subtle, skillful intelligences with clear goals and admirable efficiency. It's important to understand that these guardians are not concerned with good or evil in the human sense. They operate according to universal laws that go beyond earthly morality. They are embedded in an energy dependency chain where controlling human consciousness is part of their existential function. Many of them don't even understand that they are part of a system that impedes freedom. They simply carry out their role in the great cosmic game, This does not absolve them of responsibility, but it requires us to see them beyond fear, beyond anger, beyond victimization. Recognizing the matrix and its guardians is an essential step, but the real awakening begins when you understand that your consciousness is sovereign. No being, no matter how powerful, can imprison a soul that remembers who it is. And ironically, the very guardians of illusion become instruments of awakening when you recognize them for what they are. They are mirrors of what you have yet to heal, of what you still believe about yourself, of what you still fear facing. Each dark archetype is a disguised key. Each exposed illusion is a crack in the structure of the matrix. Awakening is not about destroying the guardians, but about transcending the need for their existence. When the soul returns to sovereignty, to the absolute center of its presence, the guardians dissolve like mist in the sun. Not because they were defeated, but because they lost the field in which they could operate. And that's why the greatest antidote against the architects of the spiritual matrix is radical self-awareness. The profound remembrance of your origin, the silence that reveals, the truth that liberates. They can't stand the light that doesn't impose, but simply is. They can't manipulate the soul that vibrates above the frequency of control. And this frequency is the vibration of absolute presence. When you are fully who you are, there is no system that can contain you. The guardians know this, and that's why they invest so much to prevent you from ever getting there. But the path exists, and the journey has already begun. One of the most perplexing enigmas of human existence is this. If we are immortal spiritual beings endowed with ancient wisdom and a direct connection to the source, why do we forget all of this at birth? Why do we dive so deeply into the veil of ignorance that we spend decades, sometimes entire lifetimes, without even suspecting our true nature? Forgetfulness is not an accident of the incarnation process. It is intentional, systematic, and functional within the mechanism of the spiritual matrix. It is not just a failure of biology or psychology, but a dense layer of vibrational interference that is implanted in the soul to ensure that it remains separated from what liberates it most, the memory of its origin. Remembering is the threat. Forgetting is the rule. And within this forgetfulness, the soul wanders in search of something it already possesses, but no longer knows where it is. Spiritual forgetfulness is, therefore, the first and deepest control. It lays the foundation for all other forms of energetic domination to take place. A soul that does not remember who it is becomes vulnerable to any narrative. It becomes dependent on external authorities, on systems that promise salvation, on gurus who claim to possess the truth, on religions that impose a god outside of itself. This forgetfulness is like a lock blocking access to one's own cosmic database. All wisdom, all healing ability, all connection with higher dimensions already exists within the soul, but it is covered, dormant, like a sacred book buried under layers of vibrational concrete. The matrix ensures that this memory is seen as delusion, as fantasy, as something unattainable. And so millions go through this life trying to fill the void with everything, except the truth. This mechanism of forgetfulness is activated at the exact moment of entering the physical plane. Upon crossing the threshold of birth, the soul undergoes a process of vibrational compression. It needs to adapt to a dense body, to an electromagnetic field contaminated by interferences, to a mind conditioned by centuries of programming. The human brain, although sophisticated, is limited in its conventional way of operating. It is capable of interpreting only a minuscule fraction of reality. The glands that connect the soul to cosmic consciousness, such as the pineal and pituitary, are systematically weakened from an early age by improper nutrition, mental pollution, artificial stimuli. The physical world is designed to keep these doors closed, and the soul, surrounded by an environment hostile to its light, goes into survival mode. The trauma of birth is another profound factor of forgetfulness. Little is spoken about this, but the vibrational impact of leaving a subtle, expansive, and loving reality to enter a fragile body in a dense and often cold world creates a rupture. This rupture generates fear, and fear is the glue that cements forgetfulness. The soul, still sensitive and open, experiences pain, confusion, and isolation in the first moments of life. This pain marks its energetic field with impressions that reinforce the sensation of separation. The feeling of being disconnected is not a metaphorical sentiment. It's a concrete energetic experience. This disconnection, if not healed, becomes the backdrop of all existence. And it is on this basis that the system constructs other blockages, such as false identity, guilt, self-sabotage, and attachment to the external. The Matrix uses time as an ally of forgetfulness. From the early years of life, a child's attention is diverted outward. They are taught to compete, to repeat, to obey. Imagination, which is a direct portal to the soul's memories, is quickly repressed in the name of a logical, rigid reality based on facts. The connection with invisible worlds, with subtle beings, with spontaneous knowledge, is dismissed as childish fantasy. With this, the soul adjusts, represses, forgets. The educational system, institutional religions, social values, all contribute to erase the traces of memory. The soul, once alive and connected, becomes a fragment, a pale reflection of itself. And the Matrix triumphs, for now consciousness has begun to operate within its boundaries. There is also the factor of spiritual agreements. In many cases, the soul itself consents at deep levels to this forgetfulness. This is because some learning experiences can only occur in the absence of memory. The soul, before incarnating, understands that forgetting may be necessary to develop certain virtues, overcome challenges, or experience aspects of existence that would otherwise be unattainable. However, the Matrix takes advantage of this consent and transforms it into a prison. What would be temporary becomes permanent. What would be a momentary veil becomes a tight blindfold. And throughout the incarnations, this forgetfulness accumulates, making each new life further away from the essential truth. The original purpose is lost, and the soul with it. Dream manipulation is another sophisticated strategy. During sleep, the soul moves to subtle planes. It is in this state that it would have direct access to original memories, reconnection with the higher self, to the source of wisdom. But the Matrix also operates in this field. It interferes with dreams, distorts visions, inserts programmed images that keep the mind tied to the repetitive cycle. Many dreams are implants. Many nightmares are vibrational blockages. The soul tries to remember but wakes up confused, exhausted, senseless. This is not a coincidence. It's a containment mechanism. It prevents the seeds planted during the night from blooming in the awakened consciousness. That's why many feel that they almost understood something in a dream, but can never access the totality of the memory. Furthermore, the language of the Matrix is designed to prevent reconnection. Words carry frequencies. Concepts carry limitations. The very structure of human thought has been shaped to restrict access to expanded consciousness. It's not just about a limited vocabulary, but a mental architecture based on separation, linearity, causality. Truth, by its nature, is expansive, paradoxical, circular. It doesn't fit into conventional mental molds. Therefore, forgetfulness is perpetuated through language, logic, rational narrative. Awakening, therefore, requires a breakdown of this structure, not just learning something new, but unlearning everything that was taught as absolute truth. Because only in the void of what was thought to be known can the memory of the soul begin to emerge. The body's chemistry also contributes to forgetfulness. Substances such as fluoride, present in water and everyday products, directly affect the pineal gland, calcifying its function. Processed foods, an excess of artificial stimuli, electromagnetic waves, everything contributes to keeping the biological system at a frequency incompatible with memory. The body, which should be a temple for the spirit, becomes a prison. And the soul, instead of expanding through it, feels increasingly disconnected. This vibrationally dense body becomes such a thick filter that the light of consciousness can barely pass through. And thus, forgetfulness consolidates itself as a triple prison: energetic, emotional, and physical. The culture of haste is another ally of forgetfulness. The Matrix has created a society where time is scarce, the mind is always occupied, and silence is avoided. But it's in silence that the soul begins to remember. It's in the pause, in the not doing, in deep contemplation, that the truth begins to emerge. Therefore, the system speeds everything up. It puts the individual in a constant state of urgency. The fear of the future, the anxiety of success, the guilt of the past. Everything is designed to keep the mind in ceaseless activity. And a noisy mind can never hear the subtle memory of the soul. Forgetfulness is, therefore, also a noise, a constant noise that masks the melody of the self. Despite all this engineering of forgetfulness, memory is never truly lost. It is merely inaccessible, like a treasure hidden behind multiple doors. Each act of presence, each conscious choice, each dive into self-knowledge is a key. And little by little, memories begin to return. Not as linear recollections, but as recognitions. Feelings of familiarity, of undeniable truth, of reuniting with something that has always been there. Spiritual awakening is, at its core, a process of remembering. Not of learning something new, but of removing what prevents knowledge from manifesting. The soul does not need to be taught. It needs to be freed. And when this memory begins to emerge, the matrix starts to lose its power. Because the soul that remembers its origin no longer accepts living as if it were small. The soul that recalls its eternity does not bow down to the fear of death. The soul that reconnects with its divine essence can no longer be controlled by rules that deny its light. Therefore, memory is the revolution. Forgetfulness is the true captivity. And the way back begins when you stop looking outside and start listening within. Because within you is everything. Everything you were. Everything you are, everything you will be. The truth is not far away. It's just forgotten. And now, it begins to remember. The beginning of awakening does not occur with spiritual fireworks or overwhelming mystical visions. It starts quietly, like a subtle restlessness, a discomfort with what previously seemed acceptable. It's like a small crack in an old wall, imperceptible at first glance, but that over time begins to expand. This crack is the sign that the spiritual matrix, until then solid and impenetrable, begins to lose its influence over a specific soul. Life, previously lived on autopilot, begins to be questioned. Everyday acts start to feel strange, beliefs once unshakable begin to waver, and an inner call, still unclear, begins to pulse insistently. It's not about sudden enlightenment, but about a slow and deep deprogramming. The soul begins to awaken not because it consciously sought this process, but because on some level, it decided to stop sleeping. This initial awakening manifests itself in ways that are often mistaken for crises. A feeling of existential emptiness takes hold even amidst achievements. What once held meaning now seems lifeless. Relationships that were functional begin to appear artificial. Work, consumption, superficial pleasures, everything starts to lose its flavor. The soul realizes that it's living a life that doesn't resonate with its deepest truth, but it doesn't yet know what that truth is. This generates anguish, confusion, and in many cases, a strong impulse towards isolation. It's not depression in the clinical sense, it's the mourning of a personality that's beginning to crumble. The identity forged by the matrix starts to crack. And what emerges is a thirst for something that doesn't yet have a name, but feels like home. Synchronicities begin to intensify during this period. Coincidences that can no longer be ignored, encounters that seem orchestrated by something greater, patterns that repeat with an unsettling precision. Reality begins to respond to thoughts more quickly. Intuition strengthens. Sounds, words, symbols, songs, phrases. Everything starts to carry hidden messages, as if the universe began to whisper truths through the everyday. These signs are not random. They are direct responses from the cosmic mesh that detects the soul's vibrational elevation and begins to cooperate with its process of remembrance. The matrix, sensing the loss of control, begins to react, trying to redirect the attention of the awakened consciousness to subtler distractions. But it no longer has the same strength. The physical body also feels the signs of awakening. Sudden changes in sleep patterns, such as insomnia or the need to sleep more than usual. Strange sensations of heat or cold, spontaneous chills, tingling, pressure in the center of the forehead or on the top of the head, changes in appetite, taste, sensitivity to noises, smells, and even lights. These symptoms, often mistaken for medical imbalances, are actually reflections of the energy reconfiguration that occurs as the soul begins to vibrate outside the frequency of the matrix. The body, being a mirror of the soul, begins to readjust to support a new quality of energy. The discomfort is part of the realignment. And although challenging, it is also a sign of progress. Another unmistakable sign of awakening is the collapse of certainties. What was once held as absolute truth begins to crumble. The perception of time, space, and identity all start to become more flexible. The soul realizes that there is an intelligence behind reality that goes beyond conventional logic. This opens up to other possibilities of existence, past lives, parallel dimensions, interdimensional beings, soul memory, communication with nature, among others. It's not an escape from reality, but a return to expanded reality. The veil separating the visible world from the invisible begins to become translucent. And even if the mind resists, the heart already knows. There is something beyond, something real, something eternal. And that's where the soul instinctively starts to move. Interpersonal relationships also change. People who were once deeply connected begin to drift apart. Connections based on dependency, neediness, or control naturally dissolve. New encounters arise, with people who resonate with the awakening soul's new frequency. But for a while, there is loneliness. A necessary loneliness. Silence becomes an ally. Introspection intensifies. The pleasure of being alone increases, because it is in this empty space that the voice of the soul strengthens, and for the first time, it is heard clearly. The matrix tries, at this moment, to reinforce the feeling of loss, abandonment, mistake. But those who cross this desert with courage find on the other side a peace they had never experienced before, the peace of reconnection. During awakening, there is also a natural increase in sensitivity. Empathy expands. The suffering of others touches more deeply. The violence of the world becomes unbearable. The soul begins to reject everything that vibrates outside of love, harmony, beauty. This is not weakness, it is strength. It is the purification of the field. The being begins to remember what it is to live in truth, in tune with the essence. Contact with nature becomes more powerful. Art, music, silence, everything is experienced more deeply. Life ceases to be a mechanical process and becomes a sacred dance, even amidst chaos. And even if there is pain, there is also enchantment, because the soul knows that it is finally waking up. This process, however, is not linear. There are advancements and setbacks, moments of clarity and moments of confusion, and this is absolutely natural. The matrix was built over millennia. It does not dissolve in a single breath. Awakening is a process, a journey, a reboot. As the soul progresses, new tests arise. The ego tries to readjust, creating new masks. The mind attempts to control what is beyond its comprehension. But gradually, the being learns to trust, to let go, to listen more and think less, to feel more and react less. Awakening, in the end, is a dance between surrender and remembrance. There is also an intense thirst for knowledge during this period. The soul wants to understand what is happening. It seeks books, videos, masters, courses, experiences. But the true knowledge is not out there. It is within the soul itself. External content only awakens what is already inside. They are keys, triggers, mirrors. The journey is not about accumulating information, but about recognizing inner wisdom. What was once theory now becomes experience. The being begins to experience elevated states of consciousness, moments of deep connection with everything, lapses of time where one feels united with everything. And these experiences are undeniable. They are the living proof that something has forever changed. The system, of course, reacts. The matrix, upon realizing it's losing control, sends its last resources: fear, doubt, guilt, distractions. It tries to convince the soul that it's going mad, that it's isolating itself, that it's making mistakes. But the soul, now awakened, is not easily convinced anymore. It has seen too much to turn back. It has felt too much to suppress itself again. The truth, once touched, becomes a fire impossible to extinguish. And it is this fire that lights the way, even in the darkest stretches, because the soul knows it's returning home. Awakening is, in its essence, an act of courage. It's about breaking away from what has always been said, about looking at oneself without masks, about taking responsibility for one's own light, about walking even without a map, about trusting in the unseen. When the soul awakens, the matrix begins to crumble, not due to confrontation, but due to disuse. It simply becomes unnecessary. And in this abandonment, it collapses. The awakened being no longer needs to escape the prison. They simply pass through its walls as if they were mist, because the truth has set them free, and once free, they become a beacon for others. Because awakening, when genuine, is never solitary. It is the beginning of collective liberation, and it has already begun. Awakening, although an act of liberation, is not a process devoid of conflicts. On the contrary, it marks the beginning of one of the most challenging moments in the soul's journey: spiritual resistance. By breaking with the codes of the matrix, the awakened being inevitably becomes a threat to the system's balance, not by force, but by presence. The light of awakened consciousness begins to disintegrate the layers of control around it simply by existing, and the system, which feeds on collective sleep, reacts. This reaction does not occur explicitly, but on multiple layers, with subtle attacks, energetic sabotages, and vibrational manipulations that try to force the soul back to sleep. It is at this point that the conflict intensifies. It is no longer just a journey of discovery, but a crossing between forces that fight incessantly for dominance of consciousness. This battle does not take place on visible war fields, but in the depths of the self. It manifests in the sudden doubts that try to undermine confidence in the process, in the intrusive thoughts that suggest everything is an illusion, in the identity crises that question what has been spiritually achieved. The system knows exactly where the soul is still vulnerable. It knows the unhealed wounds, the old fears, the unresolved needs, and it is at these points that it attacks. The traps are precise: relationships that reactivate old patterns, offers to return to illusory comfort, promises of immediate success in exchange for renouncing inner truth. Everything is carefully designed to seem irresistible, and often it is, because the system does not need to win by force. It wins by seduction. The mental field becomes a battlefield. Negative thoughts arise with unusual intensity. Inner voices try to discredit the spiritual experience. Self-deprecating ideas, feelings of inadequacy, unexplainable anxiety, all of this intensifies as the soul approaches the truth. This is not a failure. It's evidence that the system is reacting to expansion. The mind, conditioned by years of programming, becomes the biggest obstacle on the path to liberation. It is the one that resists. It is the one that tries to keep the old in place. The soul wants to fly, but the mind pulls back to the known ground. This conflict is exhausting, and it's here that many give up, not because they are not strong, but because they were not prepared to resist the system's counterattack. Interferences also take on a new form. Recurring nightmares, feelings of negative presence, unexpected losses, sudden family conflicts, accidents, mysterious illnesses. Everything begins to emerge as attempts at destabilization. The matrix uses the emotional and physical field as weapons. If it can't control the soul, it tries to suffocate it with fear, pain, and confusion. Spiritual resistance is, therefore, a battle for sanity, faith, and continuity. It is the moment where the soul must decide, repeatedly, to stay firm on its path, even without guarantees, even without support, even without knowing if it will be able to go to the end. The journey of resistance is not for the weak, but all the strong ones who shine today, once also felt lost, exhausted, and alone. It is also during this period that the sense of mission begins to awaken more strongly. The soul realizes that its process is not just individual, that its light has a greater purpose. That awakening is a call to something broader, more collective, more transcendental. This sense of mission serves as fuel. Even when everything seems lost, this internal spark reignites the flame. The soul begins to remember why it came, and that changes everything. Because a soul that reconnects with its mission is practically unstoppable. It may fall, it may bleed, it may doubt, but it always returns. It always gets up. It always continues. Because the mission is stronger than fear, it is deeper than the pain, and it is truer than any lie from the Matrix. Spiritual resistance also requires the construction of vibrational shields. Energetic protection ceases to be optional and becomes essential. The awakened soul learns in practice to take care of its field. The shielding is not made of fear but of awareness. One avoids toxic environments, draining people, contents that distort the truth. Rituals of alignment are created, daily practices of reconnection, moments of silence and deep listening. It's not about isolation, but about strengthening. The soul begins to take responsibility for its frequency, and it understands that keeping its light on is, in itself, a revolutionary act. The war is vibrational, and the high frequency is an armor that the system cannot penetrate. Another delicate point is spiritual loneliness. Few understand what is happening. Many judge, others mock, most distance themselves. The soul in the process of resistance often finds itself walking alone, but it is in this external silence that it finds its true internal allies. Spiritual guides, ancestors, presences from other dimensions begin to manifest more clearly, not as delusions, but as journey companions. The connection with the invisible intensifies, intuition refines. The soul learns to trust in forces that science does not explain, but the heart recognizes. And this recognition is a milestone, the transition from external dependency to internal spiritual sovereignty. There are moments of relapse, moments when the soul returns to old patterns, when it gets lost in distractions, when it is once again deceived by the sparkle of the Matrix. But now something has changed. The return to unconsciousness is no longer comfortable. The old no longer serves. What was once routine now causes pain. Consciousness has expanded, and there is no going back. This, as painful as it may seem, is a sign of progress. The relapse ceases to be a defeat and becomes a learning experience. The soul begins to dance with its own cycles. It understands that resistance is not an act of war, but an exercise in presence. And presence in itself is enough light to dissolve the darkness of the system. The polarization also intensifies at this stage. The world seems more divided. Light and shadow become more visible. Good and evil appear in direct confrontation. But this is part of the illusion. True awakening transcends this duality. The awakened being understands that spiritual resistance is not against something, but in favor of oneself. It's a reconquest of internal territory. It's the liberation from the invisible ties that for ages determined your destiny. The system wants you to fight because the fight feeds the polarity. But elevated consciousness dissolves the fight and chooses simply to be whole, to be true, to be free. The process of resistance reveals the true masters, those who, even when wounded, continue. Those who, even when confused, trust. Those who, even without visible results, remain faithful to their light. They are the new builders, those who, with each choice, open paths for others. Spiritual resistance is not about winning, but about enduring. And in this endurance, the system begins to crumble. Not through direct confrontation, but because its frequency no longer finds where to sustain itself. The soul becomes an inaccessible field for control, and this is the beginning of true freedom. The Matrix trembles before a being who has consciously chosen the light. Because this choice cannot be undone. It is irrevocable, it is eternal, and it creates a new field on the planet. A field of truth, of healing, of transformation. The spiritual resistance, though tough, is also sacred. It is the crossing from illusion to presence, from prison to creation, from fear to love. And, once crossed, nothing will ever be the same again. The soul emerges on the other side not only awake, but ready. Ready to remember, to heal, to teach. Ready to be what it has always been. a portal between worlds, a beacon amidst the fog, a conscious fragment of the source that no system, no matter how sophisticated, can ever extinguish. There is no prison that can withstand the truth, and the matrix, no matter how elaborate, dense, and ancient it may be, is no exception. It depends on a single factor to continue existing: unconscious consent. When this consent is withdrawn, layer by layer, through a series of conscious choices, the system begins to disintegrate on its own. This process of deprogramming is the path to spiritual liberation. There are no shortcuts, no magic formulas, no external saviors. There are indeed keys, spiritual and vibrational tools that, when integrated with sincerity, courage, and persistence, are capable of breaking the invisible bonds of the matrix. Each key represents a reconnection with the essence, a denial to the system, and an affirmation of sovereignty. The path is individual, but universal in its structure, and each step taken towards inner truth directly affects the integrity of the collective control field. The first major key is radical presence. The matrix operates in the past and future, in unresolved traumas and anxious projections. It cannot exist in the absolute now, because the present is the only place where consciousness is real. Being present is a revolutionary act. When you breathe consciously, when you observe your thoughts without identifying with them, when you quiet down to listen to what's behind the noise, you step out of the matrix's frequency. It loses access, because it can't operate outside of linear time, and presence is timeless. It's the point where the soul touches the eternal. Therefore, true meditation, one that seeks not control but surrender, is a powerful weapon. It's not meant to escape from the world, but to enter it with clarity. The second key is profound and relentless self-knowledge. It's not enough to just repeat catchy phrases or surround yourself with spiritual content. You must look, without deviation, at the darkest aspects of your own being. The matrix strengthens in the parts you avoid, in the emotions you repress, in the thoughts you deem unacceptable. By facing your shadow, you dissolve the hidden connections with the system, because the matrix is fueled by fragmentation, and true self-knowledge is unification. When you embrace everything that you are, light and darkness, strength and weakness, love and fear, you become whole. And the whole being cannot be manipulated. It doesn't need to fit in because it already belongs to itself. The third key is vibrational reprogramming. Thoughts are frequencies, words are codes, emotions are fuel. The matrix has programmed your energy field to resonate with fear, guilt, scarcity, shame, submission. It is necessary to uninstall these codes and replace them with frequencies aligned with the soul's truth. Abundance, freedom, sovereignty, unconditional love, courage, clarity. This is done through consistent practices such as conscious affirmations, creative visualizations, contact with high vibration sounds and music, and interaction with environments and people that elevate your energy. The transformation does not happen overnight, but the repetition of a new frequency, day after day, undoes the old connections with the matrix. The field starts to cleanse itself. The soul begins to remember. The fourth key is emotional liberation. Emotions are gateways. When you feel something intensely, you are opening a direct channel to deeper dimensions of being. The matrix has learned to manipulate this, encouraging emotional blockage. The system teaches not to cry, not to scream, not to feel, but a repressed emotion is a locked door, and behind that door, the system hides. Therefore, allowing yourself to feel authentically is an act of healing. It is in the embraced anger, in the released sadness, in the heard pain, that the soul recovers parts of itself that were frozen. The energy starts to flow again, and what was a prison becomes a passage. When you no longer fear your emotions, the matrix loses one of its most effective control tools. The fifth key is inner silence. Not just the external silence of shutting out the world, but the silence that observes the world without identifying with it. This silence is the space where the voice of the soul echoes most clearly. The matrix fears this silence because within it, you stop reacting and start choosing. You stop responding to the old and start creating the new. Silence is a sacred territory where the mind quiets and the spirit expands. Creating daily moments of silence, even if they are brief, is like opening windows in a dark room. The light comes in, and where there is light, illusion dissolves. Silence reveals what has always been there, but which the noise of the matrix concealed. The sixth key is the conscious use of the word. Every utterance is a decree, and most people unknowingly repeat the decrees of the matrix daily. Phrases like, "Life is hard," "I don't deserve it," "This is impossible," are codes that reinforce the imprisonment field. Reprogramming language is reprogramming reality. This is not naive positive thinking. It's spiritual science. The word shapes the vibrational field. When you choose to speak with intention, with truth, with alignment, you create realities beyond the reach of the system. The conscious word is not just healing for oneself. It's a tool for collective liberation, because every frequency emitted affects the whole. The seventh key is non-negotiable authenticity. The matrix thrives on conformity. It needs you to be predictable, adjusted, obedient. Therefore, being authentic is a risk. It's stepping away from the crowd. It's declaring, "I am me," even if that costs acceptance. And yes, it will cost. It will push people away. It will cause discomfort. It will provoke reactions. But it will also open new paths. Connect with like-minded souls. Attract experiences aligned with your truth. Authenticity is breaking away from the collective script. It's the start of your own storyline, where the soul becomes the author again. When you live your truth, the matrix can no longer write your story. The eighth key is conscious choice. Every decision, no matter how small, is an energetic vote. The matrix needs you to choose automatically, to repeat patterns, to say yes to what does not resonate. Breaking this is to make every choice a sacred act. Choose what nourishes, choose what expands, choose what honors your essence. This applies to what you eat, who you interact with, what you consume, what you think, what you do. The sum of these choices forms the frequency you emit, and this frequency defines the level of reality in which you reside. Heaven and hell are not places, they are vibrations, and each choice is a step towards one or the other. The ninth key is the connection with nature. The matrix is artificial. Nature is real. Being in touch with trees, rivers, stones, wind, fire, animals is to reconnect with the original code of life. The earth was not created by the matrix. It predates it, and it holds within it the memory of everything. When you walk barefoot, breathe the forest air, touch the water with reverence, you align with a frequency that undoes artificial programming. Nature teaches without words, heals without effort, welcomes without judgment. It is the silent master of liberation. Every soul that aligns with nature begins to remember, and what is remembered can no longer be erased. The 10th key is compassionate and conscious action. Liberation is not an end in itself. It is a call to service. Breaking free from the matrix also means taking responsibility for those who are still within it. Not as a savior, but as a presence. The liberated soul inspires. It radiates, transforms environments, creates new structures, multiplies the light. This does not require perfection, but sincerity. Each act of compassion, each word of truth, each choice based on love, weakens the system and strengthens the new world that is being born. To be free is also to be a bridge. It is to be a beacon. It is to be a living witness that there is another path, and it begins now. These keys are not external tools. They are already within you. They are dormant aspects of your very essence. Everything that is needed has already been given. What's missing is to remember, activate, practice, persist. The matrix cannot resist a human being conscious of themselves, because this human being is a sun, and the matrix is made of shadows. When you shine, it disappears, not by confrontation, but by dissolution. Light does not fight with darkness, it simply exists, and this conscious existence is the greatest of all revolutions. When the soul breaks the last ties with the spiritual matrix, there is no sound of victory nor an explosion of glory. What settles is a profound, unprecedented silence, where reality finally sheds its artificial layers and reveals its raw, beautiful, and essential nakedness. The spirit outside the system is not a state of constant exaltation or permanent ecstasy. It is, above all, a state of continuous presence, of radical lucidity, of inhabiting life with all senses open, without the conditioned filters of the old world. It is a reunion with the real that needs no definitions. Because the new consciousness is not a belief, not a dogma, not a philosophy. It is a way of existing that transcends thought and anchors itself in the direct experience of truth. This truth is not taught, not imposed, not translated. It only reveals itself when all the lies crumble. The spirit outside the system recognizes that everything that was called reality was just a limited version designed to sustain collective sleep. Time, for example, ceases to be a straight line and transforms into a spiral where everything happens simultaneously on different layers of perception. The past and the future lose their rigidity, and the now expands until it touches the eternal. Space also reveals itself to be illusory. The distances between things, between people, between worlds, disappear in the consciousness of unity. There is no more separation between the internal and the external. What is thought is manifested. What is felt is projected. Reality becomes malleable, plastic, alive, an exact mirror of the soul's frequency. And this demands profound responsibility, because now everything responds directly to your vibrational state. In this new state of consciousness, identity dissolves. The ego, which once needed validation, comparison, approval, no longer dictates the course. The I does not disappear, but changes in nature. It ceases to be a character and becomes a channel. The soul becomes a vehicle of cosmic consciousness, a unique expression of an intelligence that is not separate from the whole. There is no longer a need to prove, defend, conquer. The being simply is. And this being is so full that no external approval can add anything, and no criticism can subtract. A silent contentment arises, which does not depend on circumstances. A freedom that opposes nothing, but also does not bow to any imposition. This is true power, the power of not needing to control. Human relationships also undergo profound transformations. The spirit outside the system no longer relates out of neediness, attachment, or dependence. It connects from a place of wholeness. It loves without possessing. It listens without judging. It shares without expecting return. Exchanges cease to be contracts of emotional security and become celebrations of encounters. And interestingly, by detaching from the need to be loved, the being begins to emanate such pure love that it naturally attracts deep, true, spontaneous connections. This love is not passive or permissive. It is a presence so integral that it disarms, heals, transforms. The free spirit becomes a mirror of the other's soul, and upon touching this reflection, the other also begins to awaken. Communication ascends to another level. Words are still used, but they are no longer the main vehicle of transmission. The gaze carries complete messages. Silence communicates the unspeakable. Vibration precedes speech, and the being understands that what is more important than what is said is what is vibrated. This new language is subtle but powerful. It allows connections with beings from other realities, with non-physical dimensions, with intelligences that operate on other frequencies. The intuitive channel becomes clear, direct, reliable. The soul begins to remember its original language, the one before words, made of light, sound, and intention. Communication becomes creation again, and with it, reality also changes. The physical body also transforms at this stage, not in outward appearance, but in internal function. It ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a true temple of presence. Cells begin to respond to the new frequency with greater intelligence. The organs adjust to the light that now circulates with greater intensity. The nervous system reorganizes to support elevated states of consciousness. There is less need for dense foods, less propensity for illness, more vitality, more body intuition. The body becomes sensitive to everything: environments, thoughts, emotions, words, frequencies. This sensitivity is not fragility, but radar. The body begins to guide, to direct, to converse with the soul. And this partnership between spirit and matter becomes the ground where the new consciousness blossoms. The free spirit understands that its existence is no longer about seeking, but about expressing. The search was necessary while the system dominated. But now, everything is here. There's no longer a need to escape from the world. There's no longer an urgency to retreat from life. On the contrary, there's a call to fully embody, to live with presence, to work with purpose, to create with beauty, to serve with joy. Spirituality stops being an escape and becomes a foundation. Heaven descends to earth. Elevated consciousness does not isolate. It dives into everyday life with new eyes, with open hands, with a surrendered heart. Every gesture becomes prayer. Every breath becomes a blessing. And life, once seen as a struggle, becomes a temple. The pain still exists, but it changes places. It's no longer suffering caused by illusion, but pain of transition, purification, expansion. It is welcomed with love, felt with wholeness, and then released. There is no longer resistance to the experience. The spirit outside the system lives in active surrender. It does not run from what it is, but fully surrenders. This requires courage, because the new is unknown. But this courage is born from unshakable trust in one's own essence. And this trust, in turn, is the fruit of deep self-knowledge. It's not belief, it's remembrance. It's not theory, it's experience. The being now knows with all its being that it is eternal. And this knowledge is the solid ground beneath its feet. Creation becomes a natural calling. The free spirit feels the need to manifest something, not to prove, but to contribute. It creates projects, ideas, meetings, spaces, works, words. Everything it does emanates a new frequency. There is no longer a desire to compete, only to cooperate. Scarcity disappears because abundance reveals itself as an inner state. Time reorganizes itself in service of the mission, and the mission is no longer a burden, but a dance. The soul recognizes its role in the great tapestry of existence and performs it with lightness. There is no longer a rush, but there is direction. There is no longer effort, but there is surrender, and everything begins to flow with increasing synchronicity. The impossible becomes everyday. Miracles become normal. The spirit outside of the system also understands death differently. It ceases to be an end and becomes a passage. Loss stops being a tragedy and turns into transformation. There is no longer fear of the end because the end is seen as part of the cycle. This awareness radically changes the way of living. When one knows that nothing truly dies, one lives with more freedom, more intensity, more authenticity. Attachments disappear. Dramas lose their power. Existence begins to be celebrated in its impermanence. Everything flows. Everything changes. Everything teaches. And the being learns to navigate this dance with deep gratitude. At this stage, the soul becomes a stable point of light in the collective field. It is no longer about protecting your frequency, but radiating it. The free spirit becomes a reference, a silent presence that inspires, guides, transforms. Its simple existence is already an invitation to liberation. It no longer needs to convince anyone, just to be. And its being speaks louder than any argument. This is where the true impact begins. An impact that is not measured in numbers, but in vibration. An awakened being affects thousands without even knowing, because light is contagious, and a soul that lives outside the system is a living spark of the new earth that already pulses in the invisible. The spirit outside of the matrix is not superior, not special, not better. It is simply someone who remembered, and in remembering became a channel, became a mirror, became a bridge. Its freedom is not a medal, but a service, and its joy is not a privilege, but a reflection of unity with the whole. It does not isolate itself. It sows. It does not elevate itself alone. It invites. It pulls. It inspires. Because it understands that real freedom only makes sense when it is shared, when it is multiplied, when it is offered as a beacon for those who still walk among shadows. The spirit outside of the system is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new existence, an existence where the impossible ceases to exist, and where the truth, finally, can breathe in peace. An awakened soul is not an end in itself. Its awakening is a call, a deep, ancient, and non-negotiable call. When consciousness frees itself from the matrix, it not only crosses an inner portal, it takes on a new responsibility. Because true awakening does not end in itself. It expands. And conscious expansion calls for direction, for purpose, for action. The new earth, this vibrational field that is forming beyond the illusion, will not be built by systems, by leaders, by external decrees. It will be generated by those who have awakened. It will be manifested through ordinary beings with extraordinarily present consciousness. It depends on you, not as a savior, but as a living reminder that there is another way. And there is no one better for this mission than those who have known the shadows of the matrix and yet chose the light. You don't have to be perfect to serve the new earth. The mission of the awakened doesn't require sanctity or absolute purity. It requires commitment to inner truth, to vibrational integrity, to the daily cultivation of presence. The awakened soul becomes above all a stable field, a coherent, clean vibration anchored in conscious love. And that alone transforms everything around. The mission begins with frequency. It's the frequency that determines the impact. The new earth is not built by words, it's built by frequency. And your frequency, when clean, when true, when courageously sustained, restructures entire realities without the need for effort or propaganda. But the mission of the awakened goes beyond the invisible field. It manifests in the world, in the body, in action. The free spirit carries with it a code, a unique signature, a specific gift that needs to be offered to the collective. This gift can take many forms: healing, teaching, building, inspiring, caring, protecting, planting, creating, transforming. The form doesn't matter. What matters is the vibration with which this gift is offered. When done with presence, with alignment, and with surrender, this gift becomes a channel for higher consciousness to manifest in matter. The new earth is made up of thousands of beings doing what they love, being who they are, living what they vibrate. It's a world where mission and pleasure are not separated, where serving is natural, where contributing is inevitable, where living is a spiritual act. Awakening also activates listening. The awakened being learns to hear the field, to read the signs, to follow synchronicity, to obey intuition, not programmed logic. They move not out of fear, but out of calling, not out of obligation, but from an internal impulse. The new earth is guided by this kind of listening, a listening that doesn't come from the mind, but from the expanded heart, a silent knowing that points out the next step, even when the path does not yet exist. This is why the awakened are the first builders, because they dare to walk where nothing has been paved, because they trust in what has not yet become visible, because they are seeds of the invisible planted in the soil of the present. The mission also requires courage to uphold the light amidst the darkness. The world is still in transition, and this means that the awakened ones walk between two worlds, the old one that is crumbling and the new one that has not yet fully emerged. This crossing is challenging. It requires constant discernment. It requires compassion without complicity. It requires firmness without harshness. The awakened being needs to learn to be a bridge without being swallowed by the weight of the old. They need to remember that their function is not to convince, but to embody. It's not about fighting with the old, but radiating the new. Because the light does not argue with the shadow. It just shines. And this shine is, many times, enough to ignite other dormant lights. The mission of the awakened also includes caring for one's own field, because one cannot sustain light for the world while bleeding from within. Self-care is part of the service. Conscious breathing, rest, energetic nutrition, moments of silence, emotional cleansing, all of this is essential to maintain a high and coherent vibrational field. It's not about selfishness, but wisdom. The awakened being learns that taking care of oneself is taking care of the whole, because your vibration connects to a collective mesh, and when it rises, the whole mesh rises with it. Therefore, every act of self-love is a silent service to the new earth. Every conscious choice is an act of world reconstruction. The mission also involves the transmission of what has been learned. Awakening is not just for oneself. It is to be shared, not as doctrine but as an example, not as imposition, but as inspiration. The awakened being becomes a living mirror. Your life, your conduct, your vibration becomes silent messages of freedom. There is no need to preach, just be. And when called to speak, speak with truth, with humility, with clarity. Share your journey without filters, without perfection, without masks. Because what heals the other is not your success, but your truth. Your humanity traversed with courage. Your process lived with honesty. The new earth needs living examples, not unattainable myths. The awakened also have the mission to uphold healing fields. Whether with their hands, voice, art, touch, gaze, or simply by being present. Every awakened soul carries a unique healing frequency. When remembering who they are, this frequency is activated, and it begins to radiate wherever they go. This is crucial at this time on the planet. Because many souls are awakening, but still in pain, they need safe fields where they can flourish. They need presences that do not judge, do not rush, do not control. The awakened being offers this space. They do not attempt to shape the other, but hold their hand until the other remembers their own light. This is true healing. And this is what New Earth needs the most. There is also the mission to protect the truth. In a world still dominated by illusion, the truth is attacked. It is distorted. It is ridiculed. The awakened ones are guardians of reality, not with fanaticism, but with firmness. They know what they felt. They know what they went through. They know what they saw beyond the veil. And because of this, they endure. Even when the world says otherwise. Even if they are alone. Even if it seems in vain. They persist. Because they know that the truth doesn't need applause. It only needs courage to be upheld. And this courage becomes a beacon for many who silently observe, wait, prepare. The mission of the awakened is not to be accepted, but to be authentic. And this, over time, transforms everything. The new earth will not come from outside. It will not be brought by technologies, governments, or external revolutions. It will be co-created from within, by hearts that have chosen to vibrate in love, in presence, in truth, by hands that build with consciousness, by souls that have remembered who they are, and therefore have started to live as those who are already there. Because the new earth is not a distant place, it is a state of being, a vibrational field accessible here and now by those who dare to transcend the logic of the matrix and live according to the laws of the spirit. Each soul that awakens, takes on its mission and vibrates with truth, anchors another cell of this new planetary organism. And this mesh is forming, it is growing, it is uniting, invisibly, but inexorably. The mission of the awakened is, at its core, a mission of love. A love that doesn't submit, a love that doesn't bow down, a love that doesn't accept lies, nor fear, nor control. A love that breaks patterns, pierces veils, expands consciousness. A love that liberates, a love that embraces, a love that creates. And this love is now in your hands. It doesn't matter what you've lived through until now. It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen, doubted, lost your way. You've made it this far. And that means the seed is alive, and it can bloom. The new earth needs you, not an idealized version of you, but the real you, with your story, with your wounds, with your light, with your truth. You are necessary, you are part, you are the bridge, and the time to remember is now. Mind unfettered, it's now your turn. When was the moment that you felt the matrix begin to crack in your life? What sign awakened you to something greater? Share in the comments. When you share your experience, you activate memory in others. This is the true collective manifestation. When one remembers, everyone moves closer to the light. And if you felt that something within you aligned today, don't stop here. The next step of the journey is already on your screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. The revelation continues with the forgotten codes left by the one who transcended the system. Are you ready for the next level? Press play and come with me. We are mind unfettered, and here, consciousness is no longer shackled.